It was a day like any other. Or so I thought. School had dragged on for what felt like an eternity. And by the time I made it home, I was both physically and mentally drained. The quietness of the house greeted me as I stepped through the door. Normally, this silence would be comforting. But something felt different today. I tossed my bag onto the couch, planning to grab a snack before my dad or my stepmother, Clara, came home. As I made my way to the kitchen, a faint sound stopped me in my tracks. At first, it was hard to place. It was soft, almost like a whisper. But there was something intimate about it. My curiosity piqued. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether I should investigate. But something pulled me toward the source of the sound. I walked down the hallway, the sound growing slightly louder. When I reached Clara's room, I noticed her door was partially open, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of the bed. My heart began to race. Every rational part of me screamed to turn around, to walk away. But I couldn't. An insatiable curiosity gnawed at me. And before I knew it, I was peering through the crack in the door. What I saw left me frozen. There, lying on the bed, was Clara. Her eyes closed in pure bliss, her body moving with a slow, rhythmic grace. My mind scrambled to process what I was seeing. She was alone. But the intimacy of the moment made it feel like I was intruding on something far deeper than I could comprehend. The moment that changed everything. Time seemed to stand still as I stood there, unable to tear my eyes away. My pulse quickened, and a wave of heat surged through my body. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't move. Every part of me was locked in place, drawn into this moment in a way I couldn't explain. And then, Clara's eyes opened. Wait a second. I panicked. Surely, she had caught me, and there would be consequences I hadn't even begun to fathom. But instead of shock or anger, her gaze was calm, soft, almost inviting. My heart pounded in my chest as she smiled. A slow, deliberate smile that sent shivers down my spine. "Come in," she whispered, her voice low and warm. I stood there, unsure if I had really heard her right. But then she repeated it, this time more firmly. My legs, as if acting on their own, moved forward, carrying me across the threshold into the room. The tension was thick in the air, and I felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. Standing next to her bed, I could barely breathe. Clara's eyes never left mine, and her gaze held a kind of intensity that made my skin tingle. She reached out, gently taking my hand and guiding me to sit beside her. The warmth of her touch spread through me like wildfire, and though my mind screamed at me to stop, I couldn't pull away. The space between us dissolved. The line we had silently upheld for years vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous, far more thrilling. As she guided my hand across her skin, I felt my breath hitch. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and every touch sent jolts of electricity through me. "Don't be afraid," she whispered, her lips brushing against my ear. That moment, that one decision to stay, changed everything. Clara and I were now bound by a secret. A connection that was as intoxicating as it was forbidden. Every time we locked eyes, even in the presence of others, there was an unspoken understanding between us. We were careful. Of course. We had to be. My father was often around, and in his presence, Clara and I pretended everything was normal. But behind closed doors, in stolen moments, we explored the depth of this new reality. And with each passing day, It became harder to maintain the facade. Living a double life was exhausting. The constant fear of being discovered loomed over us like a dark cloud. There were moments when Clara and I nearly got caught. Like the time my best friend stopped by unannounced. Or when my father came home earlier than expected. These close calls heightened the tension between us. We began to argue more. Frustration seeping into our secret relationship. One night, after a particularly close call, Clara and I had our first real fight. Words we didn't mean were hurled at each other. And I stormed out, driving aimlessly for hours. But by morning, I found myself back at Clara's door, unable to stay away. She opened the door before I could knock. Her eyes red from tears. Without a word, we fell into each other's arms, both apologizing through our sobs. It was in that moment that I realized how deeply I cared for her. How much I was willing to fight for this, even if it meant risking everything. As the weeks passed, the connection between Clara and I only grew stronger. It wasn't just physical. There was something far deeper that neither of us could deny. We began to talk about the future. About what would happen if we continued down this path. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I whispered one night, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her response. Clara smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I think I'm falling in love with you too." Those words, simple yet powerful, solidified everything for me. But with that realization came a new set of challenges. We both knew that what we were doing was wrong in the eyes of others. If anyone found out, it would cause pain, confusion, and heartbreak for my father. But we couldn't stop. We didn't want to. Secrecy took its toll on us both. The constant sneaking around, the lies, the close calls. It was exhausting. The emotional strain of our hidden affair finally led us to a breaking point. We couldn't keep living this way. And something had to change. One night, after yet another close call, Clara and I had our most intense argument yet. It felt like everything was unraveling. And for the first time, we questioned if this relationship could truly last. Clara's tears mirrored my own frustration. And in the heat of the moment, we said things that cut deep. I couldn't stand the thought of losing her. But the fear of being caught had become unbearable. In a haze of anger, I stormed out, my mind spinning with questions I didn't have answers for. Could we really keep this up? Would the truth eventually destroy everything? I drove for hours, lost in thought, trying to sort out the mess we had created. It wasn't until the first light of dawn began to break that I found myself heading back home. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't let go. Clara had become too important, and the thought of a future without her felt hollow. When I arrived, Clara was waiting. She opened the door before I even had the chance to knock, her eyes swollen from sleeplessness. We stood in silence for a moment before she pulled me into her arms, both of us too exhausted to keep fighting. Our embrace said what words couldn't. That despite the arguments, despite the stress, we were in this together. That morning, something changed between us. The intensity of our connection became undeniable. And we both realized that our feelings went beyond physical attraction. We loved each other. But with that love came the understanding that we couldn't keep hiding forever. After months of secrecy and stolen moments, we had reached a crossroads. The constant sneaking around, the lies, the guilt. It was all too much. We couldn't keep living this way, pretending in front of others while hiding the truth. It was time to face reality, no matter how painful it might be. One night, as we lay together, Clara turned to me with a seriousness in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly. "We have to tell him. It's not fair to him. And it's not fair to us." I knew she was right. The weight of our secret had become too heavy to bear. But the thought of telling my father filled me with dread. How could I possibly explain something like this? How could I hurt him that deeply? And yet, I knew that continuing to lie was worse. The longer we hid the truth, the more painful it would be when it finally came out. We spent weeks planning how to break the news. We agonized over every detail, rehearsing what we would say, trying to anticipate his reaction. There were nights when we second-guessed ourselves, wondering if we should just continue to hide. But deep down, we knew that the only way forward was through honesty. The day we finally sat down with my father was one of the hardest of my life. The air in the room was thick with tension as Clara and I sat across from him, our hands intertwined under the table for support. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to find the right words. But when I finally spoke, there was no turning back. The look on my father's face when I told him the truth was something I'll never forget. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief and then to a kind of deep, painful understanding. There were moments of silence that felt like an eternity, punctuated by his deep sighs and the occasional angry outburst. Clara sat beside me, her hand gripping mine tightly, as my father struggled to process what we had just revealed. There were tears, both mine and his. There were raised voices and accusations. My father shouted, demanding to know how long this had been going on, how we could betray him like this. The anger in his voice cut me to my core. But beneath the rage I could see the hurt. I had broken something between us, something that could never fully be repaired. Clara remained quiet for most of the conversation, her own guilt weighing heavily on her. She knew what this revelation would do to my father, and the pain in her eyes was clear. But despite everything, she didn't let go of my hand. In that moment, as difficult as it was, I knew that we were making the right choice. The truth was out now, and no matter what happened, we would face the consequences together. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult I had ever experienced. My father barely spoke to either of us, the hurt and betrayal still fresh in his mind. There were moments when I wondered if our relationship could ever be salvaged, if my father would ever forgive me for what I had done. But despite the pain, there was also a sense of relief. The weight of the secret had been lifted, and for the first time in months, Clara and I no longer had to hide. It wasn't easy. There were awkward silences, strained conversations, and moments when it felt like the tension in the house would never go away. But slowly, we began to rebuild. Clara and I focused on our relationship, growing closer with each passing day, while my father retreated into himself, trying to come to terms with the reality of our situation. There were no easy solutions, no quick fixes for the damage that had been done. But Clara and I knew that our love was worth fighting for, and we were determined to make it work. Over time, my father's anger began to subside, though the trust between us would take much longer to rebuild. As the months passed, Clara and I fell into a new rhythm, one that no longer relied on secrecy and lies. Our relationship, though still fraught with challenges, grew stronger with each passing day. We had faced the truth, endured the consequences, and come out on the other side, more committed to each other than ever. But the road to healing wasn't just about our relationship. It was also about repairing the bond with my father. It took time, and there were moments when it felt like we would never get back to where we once were. But slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild. There were long conversations, apologies that never seemed enough, and moments of shared silence as we worked to understand each other again. The guilt I felt for hurting him never fully went away. But I learned to live with it. I knew that what Clara and I had was real. And I couldn't deny my feelings for her, no matter how difficult the path had been. My father, too, eventually began to accept that our relationship was more than just a fleeting affair. It was something deeper, something lasting. A year after that fateful afternoon when I first walked into Clara's room, our lives had changed in ways I never could have predicted. We had faced anger, betrayal, and guilt. But through it all, our love had remained strong. Clara and I had learned to navigate the complexities of our relationship. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, we knew we would face it together. Looking back on that moment, the moment that changed everything, I realized that despite all the pain and confusion, I wouldn't change a thing. That single decision, to step into Clara's room, had led me to a love I never expected. A connection that defied all odds. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew that Clara and I would face them side by side. And as I looked into her eyes, seeing the same love reflected back at me, I knew that we had made the right choice. Together, we could face anything. The journey we've been through wasn't easy. It was filled with unexpected twists, painful truths, and a love that defied all odds. From that one moment when I walked through the door and discovered something that would forever change our lives, we've had to face the consequences of our choices together. But through every challenge, we found strength in each other. And now we're moving forward. Together. What would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories and opinions. If you found this story interesting, make sure to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this one. Thank you for watching. And stay tuned for more.